And hello, team, and welcome back. This time we're going to be talking Chapter 5, Asset Management. Asset management really involves this identification and classification of information assets and all the systems associated with it. And it's essential that we do this to ensure the proper selection of the security controls that we want to protect against loss of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. From a policy perspective, we are going to be looking at the policy at the various methods and rating methodologies that we can use to define, inventory, and classify information systems. I'm always amazed from a policy perspective when companies want to control or manage their data, and yet one of the first things that I'll ask them is, do you have a data classification system in place? And they usually say, yes. We have policy that says these documents are secure, these documents should be labeled the other classification methods. But it's not automated, and when it's not automated, it's and there are lots of ways to do it. You can buy a data classification system for the company. You can ingest data classification into the Outlook features so that before you send an attachment, you have to classify it, things like that. There are lots of ways to approach this, and many of them just don't. A lot of reasons for cost, but have we clarified? With a data classification system, for example, then I'm able to track metadata, which is very important. Now, as we do this chapter, then, also note that ISO 27000 Section 8 is going to focus on asset management, so that might be a good Google search for you. Or NIST has guidance in a couple of special pubs. 800-60 is mapping types of information, and 800-88 is sanitization. So consider those. Now, these are the objectives for this week. Continuing with the conversation, right? An information asset. What is that then? What are we trying to, what is that if the whole chapter is about information assets? An information asset, or if the whole chapter is about asset management, an information asset is a definable piece of information stored in any manner, right? The cloud, server, desktop, however, in motion, in use, that is recognized as having value to the organization. That's really the root of it, right? This could be raw information, mined information from a data lake, developed information on your desktop, maybe purchased information, right? The issue is that it has value to the organization. So if it's damaged or compromised or stolen, then your organization is going to be embarrassed, right? There could be legal liability or financial ruin, etc., right? So we want to set policy to protect information assets. This is what we should be thinking about in this course. So, for example, dumpster diving refers to searching the garbage collection area or a dustbin maybe to look for these non-shredded confidential documents. So dumpster diving can reveal confidential information to individuals that affects the integrity of the data, right? So for example, non-shredded printouts containing project details, IT project details, can be found by unauthorized personnel, maybe a cleaning crew, right? So shoulder surfing or dumpster diving, etc. Shoulder surfing is another one. It refers to examining someone's computer from behind to steal confidential information, such as the user's password. People are actually very good at it to do this for a living. They can type your password, and they memorize the key points. What I'm saying then is we want to be careful and have policy. We want a policy that will protect us from dumpster diving. We want a policy that protects us from shoulder surfing. We want a policy that we want a clean desk policy, for example. where information is not left out on the machine, right? So any of these information assets, right? It's about there could be a warehouse of information, maybe a data lake, maybe it's paper, right? If you ever think about old hospital records, right? Hospital records are very important and have to be retained for various reasons. Hospitals pay a company to collect them and store them long term. So just think about where data is at and how it's managed, right? Intellectual property would be one of those things we want to secure. What about our IR procedures, right? Our response procedures. All of these things, and the list just goes on and on. Now, excuse me, there are also information systems. These are the supporting players, really. So information systems provide a way and a place to process, store, and transmit this information, right? Support services might be technical services like voice communication or data. It might be an environmental system. This is an information system. So we're all familiar with HVAC, right? So we want policy for HVAC heating. We want policy for lighting, air conditioning, power, right? Cold and hot aisles, things like that. This is about protecting information assets, right? We might even consider in information systems these sort of support systems, load balancers. What about failover? So we'd want a policy for backups, right? And as I mentioned, hot and cold aisles. Just some of the things that you might consider. So even a business continuity plan is created to ensure that policies are in place to deal with long-term outages and disasters, right? So that we can sustain a company's operations, right? So it's a primary goal to ensure that the company maintains its long-term business goals both during and after a disruption, right? And we mainly focus on the continuity of the data and the information system structure, right? And so you'd even want to have policy related to business continuity when protecting these information assets and systems. Now, so who is responsible, right? When we have various roles, right? An owner has a primary role in the success of ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability through these information systems. So every information asset has to be assigned an owner, right? These are the people that decide. We mentioned previously that the custodians do, right? But the owner, every asset has to have an owner, and the success of that information security program is directly related to this relationship between the data owner and the information. And so it's a way of embracing CIA and making it real, right? And so in Chapter 3 in the Information Security Framework, we defined that information security ownership already, right? So the role of the data owner, ISO 27000 recommends that we have a policy that specifically addresses the need to account for our information assets. So remember, policy is high level. So notice what I just said there. We want a policy that specifically addresses the need to account for our information assets. We don't have to get down into each asset. Those will be developed later in standards, procedures, and etc. But the policy should specifically address the need to account for our information assets and to assign an owner to that asset, right? And we'd want to do this via some sort of application tracking system and perhaps even tied to the risk register system, I would recommend. So we want to define the asset, assign the value of the asset, define the level of protection required, who should have access to the asset, who has day-to-day security tasks and operational tasks, and maybe something about ongoing governance. As a rule, security applications, in my experience, are not critical apps. If they go down, the business is not impacted. If they go down, it's only a matter of time until the adversary is aware of it and begins to attack. But if they go down immediately, there is no instant impact to the business in general with security. So as the role of a data owner is we're contemplating how would we apply security protection, what level of protection. As a rule, I've always thought of security applications as green. If you color code them, green, yellow is middle of the road, and red would be critical apps, right, that impact the business. So we want to implement security controls. We want to delegate the security requirements to the custodians who do, right? So all that's very important. There's also the ISO, the Information Security Officer. They are accountable, right? Remember, the owner is responsible for doing. The ISO, the Information Security Officer, is accountable for the protection of the assets. So that's the distinction there. The owner is responsible. The ISO is accountable. And they will provide the direction and guidance to the appropriate controls. And then the owners and the custodians are going to focus on specific assets, is how that would break down. The book on page 127 gives a good example of information ownership policy statement on page 127 in the gray area. So very good. Procedures, when we drill down into the procedures portion, these become those, so policies high level, procedures are detailed instructions to accomplish a task or a goal. So those procedures are considered at the lowest level of the information security program, right? And we saw that a few weeks ago in the hierarchy that we read about. So the procedures define how the security policy will be implemented in an organization through repeatable steps. It's very important that it be a repeatable process. So for instance, a backup procedure specifies the steps that a data that a data custodian should adhere to while backing up the critical data to ensure the integrity of the business. Now, where did the custodian get that information? They got their guidance from the owner. And the owner is responsible, the data owner. And the ISO above them, so I went from bottom to top, is accountable, right, providing that guidance. So personnel should be required to follow the procedures to ensure the security policies are fully implemented. Okay, great conversation. So moving then to information classification next, and I'll just get started on this and then we'll take a short break. So the classification system will address different types of data, right? And still the point is to safeguard the CIA based on content. So the assumption here is that information systems might contain information that requires different levels of security, right? It's not all the same data security levels in a single system often. And so there are various clearance levels and ways that we can assess that. We'll look when we come back at the military, for example. They have a vivid example. And they classify information systems not only on systems alone, but also on people. And those people are assigned clearance levels. We will look at that when I come back. So information classification is an administrative control. We talked about management controls, administrative controls, physical controls, technical controls. Information classification is considered an administrative control. And examples of administrative controls are preventive controls, right? Like the security policy we'll put in place, like the monitoring that will go with it, job rotation, data classification, and personnel procedures that we just touched on. Okay, let's take a break. We'll come back.